From last year's medical supply and toilet paper shortage to Christmas presents arriving late to empty car lots, COVID has disrupted the supply chain of a variety of items. So how will that affect us locally in the next few months? We'll talk to supply chain experts about some of the reasons these disruptions are happening and to local businesses about how this impacts our area. That's coming up next on Newsmakers, presented by WNIN and the Evansville Courier and Press. Over the past year, we've seen weaknesses in different supply chains. First, a lack of medical supplies, toilet paper, and now there are reports that you better order presents early this year. So, what's causing some of these shortages and how is that going to affect products in our area? Is there an end in sight? Our first guest teaches supply chain management at the University of Evansville, Dr. Yolanda Obaze. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Supply chain is a word that's been showing up in headlines everywhere, and for those who don't really know what that means, explain it, please.
I guess the best definition for supply chain is looking at it as a network of different companies that move or create the flow of products, information, and services and money from a point of origin to a point of destination. So think of it this way, supply chain. It's a network of companies that supply the products that are needed. And it's a network of companies that demand the products that are supplied, in essence. So how that network comes together to create a streamlined flow of the products, information, services, and money is highly important in our economy today.
So we're talking from the point of origin, you mean like out in the field, somebody harvesting something or gaining something to the point it comes to your doorstep.
Absolutely. Talking about from the farms in terms of if it's food, in the food industry, to pharmaceuticals that are making drugs from scratch, or even ordering parts to make the drugs from scratch, in terms of components for a car, manufacturing a car, how each component is made. And when we say the origin, we're saying how it's manufactured in essence. And so you're kind of looking at a streamline of organizations that are first creating the starting point of a product that we kind of consume at the end.
What are some of the issues that have cropped up in the past year or so?
There's been a lot of disruptions in the supply chain. And when we say disruptions, is situations, circumstances that might hinder the flow of goods and services. And so talk about from COVID to government policies changing, to decisions, consumer behavior, disasters, natural disasters, man-made disasters. There has been just a collection of different things that have happened in the past year that is affecting the supply chain.
Well, let's take this to real time right now. What's the biggest issue?
Wow. That's interesting.
Issues.
The biggest issue I would say today is, as of today, we can look at talent shortages. We can look at delays in the ports, delays in the docks, company docks. The number one, I would say for now, I would say maybe is talent shortages, I would say, from my perspective.
You said talent, you mean workers,
people who have the skill set, the ability to, in essence, run the supply chain.
Well, that can be everybody from
drivers that are driving the trucks to technicians to, it could be even in the hospitals now, nurses that are required. You have to look at the supply chain as a system of different companies coming together and working together. Once one part of the supply chain is affected, the other parts are affected as well. Look at it this way, at the ports, they're now requiring a 24/7 labor that is required to keep the ports running. And so when policies like that are passed, or when policies like that are encouraged, you start to see that there is need for human labor at this point.
In our area,
Yeah.
how are all these issues affecting our area locally?
Locally, I would say from, again, what we're seeing is a lot of businesses now in the area are still operating, which is good. You are seeing a lot of signs of needing to hire new workers, but you are still seeing a lot of companies that are operating. You are seeing a lot of stores that are still, we still have products on the shelves compared to what we're seeing in other parts of the nation where there is a lot of, empty shelves. And so you're starting to see that our economy here locally is, I would say, is doing well. And so it's good for us to start thinking, making wise decisions on how we can hopefully not allow it to impact us the way it's impacting the rest of the world.
Is there an end in sight? Do you see light at the end of the tunnel?
I do. I think once a lot of companies are starting to make strategic decisions, wiser decisions on how they're running their supply chain, I do see light at the end of the tunnel. It might take a year or two,
Wow.
but we will get to where we're seeing a lot of companies now start making decisions now for the impact in 2-3 years.
What one thing would you want everyone to know about the supply chain in the U.S. and the world that maybe we haven't talked about?
Well, we've kind of seen from the past year what situations like panic buying has caused to the supply chain. There's been a lot of uncertainty that has impacted a lot of people's decisions on how to buy products. And I'm not just talking about from the individual consumer point of view, I'm also talking about companies deciding how they want to stock their inventory and how they want to have safety stocks. What we call safety stocks is just assets that you want to have in stock or assets you want to have in the organization so you can keep the supply chain running. And so I would say we should try to maybe feign from panic buying or try and do more wise buying, I would say, in the sense of being strategic in what it is that you need and how you need it, when you need it, to know how to deliver it to your customer.
Dr. Baze, thank you for joining us on Newsmakers today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Vanta Kota II, CEO of the Ports of Indiana, which includes the port in Mount Vernon. Thanks for joining us from Indianapolis.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Kota, what kinds of items come in and out of the Port of Indiana in Mount Vernon? It must be a wide range.
Yeah, so our concentration is typical of what Indiana is. We grow things, we make things, we move things. So it's agricultural based, energy based, and manufacturing based. So we see the byproduct of processing ag to the raw steel that eventually becomes cars. So it's an exciting place to be and observe.
Well, people have heard about the backup in California, and I'm wondering how is that affecting the Port of Indiana's operations?
Yeah, here in the Midwest, we're not being affected by what is essentially a container play out of Asia. So largely finished consumer goods coming through the Port of LA and Long Beach is the big bottleneck. Those containers, how it would affect our day-to-day lives, then get on a train and come to the central Midwest for the broad distribution that makes its way across the country. We don't participate in containers. Where we lie in the supply chain is that first layer of value add from raw product to its first sustainable value piece. So taking a the raw steel and preparing it to go into manufacturing. So Indiana has one of, well, actually the largest per capita of manufacturing than any other state. And so that's a natural commodity for us.
Well, this is a big question. If you have any specific examples, would be helpful. What supply chain issues are you having? If you can give us a hint of the range.
Yeah, so within the heart of the Midwest, the supply chain issues that we traditionally have had in the past are the ones we're experiencing now. Really, over the last 10 years, it's kind of ebbed and flowed, but personnel is a huge issue within the supply chain. And really, it gets harder as years advance. For the younger generation, millennials, so that generation has a 1% identification with transportation as a career, transportation and logistics. So first of all, we're not very visible within the job landscape, and most of the employment is not highly visible, but they're really, when you get down to it, they're really good jobs. So we've struggled with that issue for, I want to say, the past 10 years, and going through the pandemic and the fits and starts and bottlenecks that it has caused, and really on the human capital is really where our supply chains get gummed up.
You said personnel. Can you give us a couple of specific examples of jobs that you're talking about?
Yeah, so the first one, the glaring one, is a trucker shortage. Trucking has been, drivers have been in a shortage. Some companies have over 100% turnover annually because there's so much job hopping, and the reason for that is the demand is so high. So that becomes a difficult part of the supply chain, and almost 100% of everything that we consume is delivered by a truck. So that has really, over the past 10 years, always been a highlighted issue within our supply chains. And then, qualified tradespeople. We always need people in industrial sectors and industrial places to be operating. So that really affects the industrial trades and the building trades. These are all choke points within the supply chain.
Well, Mr. Cota, thank you for joining us on Newsmakers today. Thank you for taking time.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Our next guest is on the ground getting goods from one location to another. Ken Smith is the president of Breck Logistics, Inc. here in Evansville. Ken, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
You're welcome. Could you explain your company's role in the supply chain?
Yes, absolutely. We do a lot of business-to-business transfers. So we deal a lot of raw goods, getting them to the manufacturer, where it's going to be transmitted into either work in process or finished goods. And we have a trucking company, Smith Transfer Company, where we actually have trucks and trailers that are hauling the product. And we also, Breck Logistics is a third-party logistics provider. And what they do, we contract with other motor carriers like Smith Transfer to haul the product from customer to customer. So it's a lot of business-to-business transactions is what we're doing.
Were you having any issues before COVID hit?
Not the same type of issues that we're having now. So a lot of things that we've run into since COVID is with a shortage of supply of parts. So with our trucking company, for example, we've run into situations where a truck may have some sort of mechanical issue. It goes into the shop, and it may be, in the past, before COVID, that part would be in inventory. We get the truck out the same day. But since COVID and a lower supply of parts that are available, that repair might take 5 days, it might take 2 weeks, and so our truck is tied up for a long time. And at that point in time, what do we do with that driver? If we have an available truck, we'll put him in another truck and he goes and does his normal job delivering product. But what's happened is our trucks are filled right now, and if we go to the rental market now, the rental trucks are hard to come by because other trucking companies are in the same situation where we are, where they're having to get rental trucks because their truck is stuck in the shop somewhere. So there's less of a supply there, and so we might have drivers that aren't able to run because they're stuck in the shop. So that's one example of an issue that we've had from COVID, just a shortage of supply of available parts that are in inventory whenever they need to be repaired. But talking about the logistics side of things, because there's a shortage of trucks out on the road, as there was before COVID, we might run into a situation where we've got a customer that wants to ship something from northern Indiana down to Owensboro, Kentucky. And I've got a specific lane in mind that I'm thinking of where in the past we would have had no problem hiring a truck to haul that shipment for our customer. Well, now we may not get it shipped on the same day that it was supposed to ship on. It might take 2 or 3 days for us to find a truck that's available to haul that particular lane. And what the trucking company is asking for now is not the same rate that we had before, but now it may be two or three times higher than what the rate was before.
Real time, right now, what problem are you seeing currently right now that is maybe really a thorn in your side?
There's also a truck shortage right now. That, if I were to go to a dealership right now and say, hey, I want to buy 5 trucks, $150,000 a truck, sure, somebody would want my business, but if I sign on the dotted line today, I may not get trucks for 12 months, 15 months. I was talking to a dealership today, and they said, well, we might be able to get something delivered Q1 of 2023. So there's a truck shortage out there as well.
Well, looking into your crystal ball, how long do you see these kinds of issues continuing, if you care to venture a guess?
I wish I had a good answer for you. So in the current environment, we're just working through it. I don't know how long this will last. I wish I could say, I'm a macroeconomics expert and I could give you that type of answer, but it's just we're kind of dealing with it as we go through it, trying to service our customers the best that we can and provide as best service as possible.
Mr. Smith, thank you for taking a few minutes to talk to us on Newsmakers.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Now we have Tara Barney, CEO of the Evansville Regional Economic Partnership. Ms. Barney, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
What are some of the things that you've seen local businesses dealing with in respect to supply chain issues?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's affecting a vast swath of our local businesses. Some more than others, certainly in manufacturing and retail. I think that's where we're seeing the biggest effects. Retailers, because their inventory is so low. And so if you look at shelves over this past year, our retailers' inventory has gone from pretty generous during the COVID shutdowns to empty shelves now. And it's kind of it's routine. It's not just in one particular sector of retail. So this is the year to shop early for Christmas.
Well, yeah. Well, this doesn't include just items in the stores. Even Toyota has shut down a few days because their suppliers hadn't sent the parts they needed to continue working. Mm-hmm. How else are supply chain issues affecting our local manufacturers?
Well, I think that's a great one since you referenced Toyota. So much of that is about, engines or different parts, but it's also about chips. And I just learned something, so I'll share it with you that I didn't know. I figured there were 15 or 20 chips in a car. There's something like 1,400 or maybe up to 3,000 chips in any car.
Holy cow.
And so those are essentially all coming from a few countries that aren't here. And so, but to answer your question, that's true of power strips and washing machines and so many things that are in our manufacturing chain. And so it's affecting our manufacturers broadly just through that whole chip issue. But the other significant issue, depending on the manufacturer, is access to specialized parts. And so that's affecting a lot of our manufacturers broadly.
Specialized parts such as?
Well, some of the parts of the whole automotive chain are significant, but also a lot of things that go into some of our plastics, a lot of the chemicals and that sort of thing. Aluminum, for example, is a rare commodity that has to move around the world, and so that has an effect on our whole aluminum industry. And we're pretty big in the aluminum industry, so some of those things are not really seen at the general public level, but they play out in how we keep our economy, moving at an even clip.
Well, I've heard a lot of stories about building material shortages or a spike in the prices of them. Oh, okay. And so have you heard of that spike in prices of these materials? Have you heard of that from local builders?
Oh, we absolutely have. Now, it's been very segmented. So wood was a big deal for a long time. And not just wood in general, but the particular wood that's needed for, stick-built buildings. And so that had a big effect on our housing market. That's evened itself out now and is less of an issue. But it does seem to move around in different parts. But right now, I don't know of any industry element of like the residential housing market that's a problem. Our housing market is actually doing pretty well right now.
That's good. What are some of the solutions that businesses are coming up with to work around potential product shortages that you've heard of?
Well, actually, many of our businesses stay in close touch. We have a lot of major manufacturers that might seem like competitors, but they're really not. And so they do communicate regularly. And I know one of the conversations that's going on, not just in our market, but in our country, is what do we do to be less reliant on the global chain? So do we think about building a chip manufacturing facility in this country? And that's a very long time process. It's a big investment and it takes a lot of time. So those things they're not going to help us with this initial issue. Our initial issue is going to come from actions like Barry took when we couldn't get masks, and they went out and they bought some machines and they started making masks here. That was a brilliant move by them and a great example of what I think we're going to see, because some of these products that we are depending on the global supply chain for are not that expensive a product. That's just where we've been in the habit of acquiring them from. And I think we're seeing many of our manufacturers look for ways to do that domestically.
Well, tell us about any new partnerships or collaborations that you've seen come out of these issues.
Among businesses?
Yes.
I think many of those are more in what I consider the retail space, where they're finding ways to, just to follow on your last guest, finding ways to share loads and that sort of thing when they need to move products, and adjusting the way they move products depending on how much access they've got to trucks. Trucks and drivers get talked about all the time, but they're a local issue just as much as an interstate issue.
Well, the average consumer viewer watching this show is probably wondering, what can I do to alleviate any of these supply chain issues?
Well, the average consumer can probably do very little except be aware that it's not just insensitivity by our local retailers. It's something that retailers at the national level and at the local level are facing the same issue. So again, you're going to have to be a little more sensitive to what you're able to buy and how quickly. But I think our general public, probably their biggest impact is in understanding the whole relationship to this and the lack of available workforce. Our overall availability of workforce is not helping us to get out of this circumstance we're in right now. And it's going to take some time. It's not just, COVID might have catalyzed it, but it was a process that was coming. And so how we get out of it's going to take some years.
Well, the average consumer sort of has to rethink his whole buying strategy, I guess, especially heading into the holidays.
Certainly. I wasn't kidding when I said do your shopping now, but that also applies to things like buying a car. The amount of, you order a car now and you might not get it for a year and a half. And so planning ahead, I guess, is the brilliant advice I'd have to offer, Tom.
Well, is there any aspect of this whole large issue that doesn't get talked about enough, in your opinion?
I think that the things that aren't talked about enough in this space are probably an understanding of how globally interfaced we are. There's always the conversation about let's build more things here and let's build more things elsewhere, and It's a very complex, it's like playing three-dimensional chess.
Right.
And so, in truth, the thing that doesn't get talked about enough is what's the right mix of having domestic availability. And I'd say, we are at health risk, and we have, significant challenges if we don't have some medical supplies available in our country. That's probably something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough.
Well, Tara Barney, thank you for coming here to be on Newsmakers today. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks to all of our guests for joining us. Next week, we're taking a field trip to the Mesker Park Zoo to take a peek at the new penguin exhibit and speak to local officials about why they think projects like the penguin exhibit and the new pool are important for the community. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers, presented by WNIN and the Evansville Courier and Press.